Welcome back. Babita Deokaran was not only a witness in a PPE probe, she had also flagged several potentially dodgy tenders at Tembisa Hospital. And I can tell you that the Deokaran murder trial has been postponed until October for a pre-trial hearing in the South Gauteng High Court. The 6 men charged with her murder have made a brief appearance. They face charges of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and possession of firearms and ammunition. Deokaran was shot dead outside her home in Johannesburg South in what was an apparent hit. She was a key witness in PPE fraud and corruption investigations. And also, as I said, flagging potentially dodgy tenders at Tembisa Hospital. The hospital has now become infamous for ordering a whole bunch of skinny jeans. Well, Alex van den Heever is a professor at the Wits School of Governance, and he has written an opinion piece asking, how do you stop a hospital heist? He says, appoint a plunder-proof board. Prof, joining us now, thank you for being with us. Professor, looking at this 850 million or so spent at Tembisa Hospital that concerned Babita Deokaran, possibly got her killed. Is that an example of a classic hospital heist?
Yes, and I think it reflects the systemic weaknesses that have been built into the public health system. Essentially, what we've allowed is, through political appointments into the administrations and the hospitals, we've effectively created an accountability system that doesn't direct its focus on the public interest. It rather directs its accountability toward people who are essentially prepared to misuse the state. So the problem is really one that requires a systemic solution, because what we're seeing there is not unique to Tembisa Hospital. The practice appears to be widespread. This is just an egregious example of what is actually apparently quite common.
Yeah, and it suggests that the people in charge often don't care passionately about helping the sick. So one of the big problems you raise is that CEOs are often political appointments. How has that been allowed to happen?
Well, nothing prevents political appointments anywhere in the state. And this is a structural flaw. You don't run public facilities and services in this way. Internationally, you do introduce a sort of public entity governance frameworks, which ensure that the accountability structures are localized and focused on the particular organization. Plus, at the administration level, you also you de-link the member of the executive from, for instance, the head of department that is appointed. That's why internationally you'll hear about so-called permanent secretaries, because they're appointed on a long-term basis, not 5-year contracts, which in South Africa are timed to coincide with the tenure of members of the executive. And that is a serious problem in the way that our public systems are organized. So what we're seeing here in the public hospitals and in provincial administrations, where the abuse is egregious and obvious, is actually widespread and across all of our state institutions, because this kind of infiltration of the state for nefarious purposes is relatively easy to organize if you've kind of captured your interests through the patronage networks of political parties.
So you explain that the MEC appoints the CEO and then the province still holds the rein. It often approves payments, but everybody is politically way too comfortable. I mean, are there even high standards that a CEO should meet?
In fact, there's no real framework for holding CEOs to account. It appears, so somebody might argue, well, no, we appoint CEOs using an independent board or whatever. Any MEC who fails to basically use their discretion to influence appointments is really just exercising a discretion. There's nothing that prevents them from influencing these processes. So this is a fundamental problem. And because there's a sort of a center of power within a province and in a national department, it essentially means that it's possible to establish networks that can collaborate in abusing state services for patronage purposes. And the patronage won't only be procurement, it will be appointments as well that are coordinated by the network, as well as any other power that can be exercised by that public authority. But in the case of these public hospitals, they're essentially not accountable in any coherent way for their job. They can be held accountable in another way. That is, if you don't steal, or you don't organize issues or appoint the right people, then we will remove you. That's how the accountability system currently operates. The people who do their job are the ones that end up being suspended and removed. And that is when a system has become toxic, as we have in many of the provinces.
All right, Professor, before you go, I want to speak to you about the Limpopo Health MEC. That video has gone viral. But first, let's solve this problem or put forward the solution you have, which are these very strong boards. So who should appoint the boards? It sounds like there are not many functioning boards at the moment. Who should appoint them, and how do you set them up to be theft-proof?
So essentially, this is what we would have in many countries, which is independent boards that are structurally independent of any political structure and appointment process. So it's essentially you create a structure. You can have the different ways of making sure that the board is not appointed by anybody related to the executive or a political party. Once they're appointed, they're the ones that appoint and remove the chief executives of the relevant organization, so of the public hospital. So that is an absolutely critical component, is that the accountability structure is then localized to the organization itself. And it's important to note that we have boards at the moment. We have, let me put it in technical terms, we have rubbish boards. We have boards that provide absolutely no governance whatsoever. They are advisory boards which are appointed by the MECs very often and all come under the jurisdiction of the national department, national minister. They have absolutely no value whatsoever. They have no powers to intervene. They're not properly structured to actually provide supervision. So that's useless. What you need is a board with power, and that is a critical design feature.
Yeah, and I guess on the good side, you do say that there could be real change if that happens within a matter of 5 years. We're running out of time, Professor, so one of the issues you raise, an example which was interesting, you talk about a CEO who orders doctors to refuse care for people without a referral letter. So this goes against the grain of good doctors and nurses who want to help anybody in trouble. And therefore, I'd like to ask you about the actions of the Limpopo MEC, Matuba, who's a doctor, who's talking about foreign nationals and uses one as an example. Is there any danger that becomes a sort of tangible permission to refuse care to certain sectors?
Yeah, so this is a very dangerous situation. If we start to allow arbitrary discrimination against particular patients within the health system, we're essentially in danger of becoming I think an unfit health system. The objective of a health system is to treat the patients who need to come through. To the extent that you need to differentiate between patients, like paying patients or somebody who's, for instance, from another country or within one province from another province, then you need to establish a statutory framework that is fair and properly deliberated on in the public to ensure that discrimination is not unfair. But what we see from the Limpopo MEC is the sort of arbitrary abuse of that patient, saying, you're not meant to be here. Now, it is the responsibility of government, that includes that MEC, to establish a framework. That's not at point of service where an MEC has absolutely no role to abuse a patient. They've got their day job is to get the frameworks in place. And I can tell you now, there's no real consideration of the legislative framework in Limpopo or at the national level to address these issues in a reasonable and fair manner. You do not just arbitrarily discriminate individuals within the region, and people are always going to cross the borders to be treated in our services. So that is a contingency you must legislate for and plan for and deal with those other countries on a coherent basis. And the problem is they haven't done their job. National hasn't done its job. The provinces haven't done their job. And to moan at patients is it's just beyond the pale.
Yeah. And very quickly, what is happening in practice? I guess the idea is that anybody in trouble, a woman is about to give birth, you don't turn away, no matter what her nationality is. But what do you do with that problem that people are coming in and the hospitals are burdened?
Well, we've known about these problems since 1994. I was part of discussions on this. It was anticipated that this is an issue going forward. The problem is that from 1994, essentially national government and provincial governments have sat on their hands and done absolutely nothing. Internationally, there are frameworks that are developed to manage this so that the risk is not transferred to the individuals concerned. It is untenable that you expect a doctor or a nurse to discriminate against a patient at point of service. You must deal with this problem at a national and regional level. And that work, that heavy lifting, the real work that government has to do, they haven't done. And this is basically unacceptable, that now we say, oh, we've got a problem because people are coming across the border. Yeah, we've known about this for years. It is predictable. Deal with it. But don't deal with it by transferring risk to those individuals. Deal with it by sharing risk across countries, and that's what we should have done.
Yeah, and people's lives could be in danger. Thank you very much for your take, Professor Alex van den Heever, Wits Social Security Systems Administration and Management Studies Chair.